this is Angela.
Angela, John Shoup here. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm happy. Thank you. I look back in the old emails. I'm going, I can't find her phone number.
I thought about that today. I was like, I don't know if they exchanged numbers. So here we are.
Yay! Thanks so much for being part of this. Thank you so much for the phone number and the prompt response too. So, you are pastor of what church or what denomination or?
Well, I'm one of Bishop Barvin's pastors, so I'm in the ELCA, and I serve at Bethesda on the Bay Lutheran Church. We are in Bay Village, so western suburbs of Cleveland.
Fantastic. And how long have you been there?
Like this week, it's 7 years.
Happy anniversary.
No, I'm sorry, 5 years. 7 years married. This week is 5 years at the congregation. Oh my gosh.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
So you started there on Valentine's week then?
Yeah, I did. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's fantastic. I've always loved Valentine's Day because it's the only day that you have a history as a kid, you know, when you hand out to Valentine's, your favorite kid,
True.
you know. I've always loved it that way. So, okay, so you were part of the same congregation you're at right now during the pandemic, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how was it when you first heard about it? How did it affect you and your group, and then give me some details as far as the people and individually?
When I first heard about the pandemic?
Yeah, way back in March of 20, I think I started.
It did, yeah. Well, we were in the middle of Lent then, like everyone, and so we had to quickly make some changes and decisions, and I think everybody thought, well, we'll just make these decisions for a couple of weeks, and we'll adjust and take a pause, and then we'll resume. So it was a lot of quick decision making and reconfiguring and everything within a short window of time.
How was it the anxiety level of your congregation? Because you're the first person I've ever interviewed in this capacity.
The anxiety level of the congregation, honestly, I think my people aren't very anxious, so I don't think they were very anxious. I think all of us were uncertain, right, and a little nervous, and we actually met, the last Sunday we met in person for a while was March 17th, and so we kind of changed things up for that week, and instead of doing a full-blown service, I just did a sort of morning prayer service, and then we had a time to check in and share and talk about our concerns. And the numbers were smaller. People stayed home because of the pandemic. Not everyone was there, but I think for the most part, a lot of confusion as well, more than anxiety.
I agree. So as the pandemic wore on through the summer months, how was it then? I mean, what were you finding? When did you feel that things started to change a little bit, or you think people were still anxious or not anxious, or everything was the same, or do you think it started to change in the summer of 20?
So interesting you use the word anxious. I didn't experience a lot of anxiety. There were a small handful of my people, like I'm thinking 2 of my leaders in particular, who were really nervous and still are, frankly. But I didn't think of my folks as nervous. I thought they were always very willing to sort of roll with the punches and try new things and experiment. And we went immediately on Zoom, and the attendance was high, and everybody was present and supportive. And then in the summer, we actually did something new. We worshiped outside for the very first time, and so they were very eager to do that and to be together. I think the running theme wasn't anxiety. The running theme was we really miss our community. So it was sadness. I think there was, confusion as well, but mostly sort of sadness and lamenting and, dealing with a bit of trauma as well.
Well, I think it stems from the leadership then, because if you're leading them and they're following your lead in many cases, as far as how you react to it. So I think that shows a lot about your leadership.
Well, it's interesting because I was talking with some of my colleagues way back when, and I'd say, if I stay calm, everybody will stay calm. and I'm sort of facetious facetiously would say that, but it is true. You're right. I mean, good leadership goes a long way. That's true.
Big time.
Yeah.
So when you had another question, because I've interviewed funeral homes too.
Okay, sure.
And it was difficult for them because they had, people who never saw their loved ones in the nursing home. They couldn't see them, and then they died, and they go to the funeral, and it was just terrible for them.
Yeah.
Do you do any of grieving or anything like that when you're part of your responsibilities? Like go to different houses or visit with families who lost people?
Do you mean, do I bury people?
No. Do you go to houses of people who are seriously ill or had just passed?
Sure. I haven't done much of it during the pandemic, though. I mean, it's been sort of that fine balance of how much pastoral care to give and what's safe to do. And yeah, it's been hard to know what's the best road. So I would say I've probably done less in-person pastoral care than ever before.
And that's before was how much, and now is how much per week or per month?
Well, depends. I mean, my first year here, I had 13 funerals, and so it was a lot. And you're in people's homes a lot. You're in the hospital a lot. It's you're gone. Some weeks it can be 5-6 visits. Some weeks it can be none. Depends on what's going on. But during the pandemic, I've really done very little. I've done most of my pastoral care virtually, or I've done it over the phone. Text message is a big deal. Facebook message has been a big deal.
Okay.
And then in summer months, I have been able to, or these warmer days, meet outside with folks. So yeah, it's been definitely cut in half, if not worse.
When you would visit with them and they lost someone due to COVID, if they did, because I know that there's a lot of anger in the funeral home director of business. And they were the first ones to feel the anger because they're the first ones to talk to the family about their loved one. What did you sense when you visit someone or virtually or however you visit with them, if they passed away by COVID? Or did you?
I've only had two dads of 2 or 3 pass away because of COVID. And honestly, I don't think anger was the primary thing that I would sense. I think even when there is anger, I tend to experience it as sort of a forerunning emotion, and under it is all kinds of other things. And
right.
I've experienced a lot of grief, a lot of trauma, and a lot of confusion and frustration for sure. One of the families I'm still working with, the grandfather/father of the family passed away because of COVID. He had other health issues going on as well. But, I think as the pandemic continues on, definitely there's anger because of sort of I experienced it as sort of the daughter, especially, there's a lot of nonchalantness about like the lack of mask wearing at times, and just sort of the lack of some people taking it seriously is where the anger seems to rest, but not with the death itself. That's
good. I mean, I didn't think about that when I first started talking to the funeral home directors, but they're huge on the front line, just as you are, because they're trying to keep people calm and hopeful. And it's hard to do that when you're surrounded by the situation. Yeah, absolutely. Right. It's interesting to look back in January of that first year of the pandemic. We had a death of one of our younger ladies, younger retired. She was like 62. She and her husband went on a cruise that January or that Christmas and came home with pneumonia. And looking back, we all kind of wondered, and sure enough, she came home and she was like our very first known case of COVID and had died. And that was so early on that it was just so much confusion. Like, what the heck, right? Like, wow. And we didn't know it. We just thought she died of pneumonia. Like, how did this youngish, healthy woman die of pneumonia? Yeah,
right?
Seriously, no one dies of pneumonia today.
Right, exactly. And so they went back, and I guess they had enough test results and lab work to test and found out it was COVID. So I don't know. I mean, I think each case is different. And I think, honestly, I think as the pandemic continued, the people who have been personally affected by it are probably angry at the government. I experience angry at sort of society as a large. Like, why isn't this getting better? It's been going on for too long.
It's hard to be angry at a virus because you really can't see it or
Exactly.
yell at it or point fingers at it because you don't know where it's at.
Right.
So you got to be angry at somebody. So I can see
Exactly.
that. When people would come to you in your pastoral care areas, whether it's Zoom or whatever, how did you deal with it? Because you have to be positive all the time, because they come to you with challenges and situations and everything else, because you are the person who's going to uplift them. How many times that happened, let's say a month or a week or whatever, how often? And then how did you get your energy back to try to constantly be positive? Because after a while, it's got to take a toll, I would think.
Well, I don't think of it as always having to be positive. I don't think that's my role. I think my role is to meet people where they're at. And that's not always to sort of shine sunshine on people's frustration or situation. I think people really need to be listened to and cared for. How often does that happen? Oh, I don't know. If I had to make a guess, I'd say 10-ish times a month I'd get sort of an emergency phone call. And I honestly, there have been moments, the first about a year and a half, I did fine. And then I think I kind of crashed when I just needed to sort of take a step back and take care of myself.
Yeah.
But I was, it took a while for it to catch up with me, but it finally did. And so, yeah, it really is. Honestly, I did. I met daily for 9 months with 2 very close friends of mine on Zoom, and we did yoga every day. And I walked my dogs, and I ate well, and I just worked hard to take care of myself, truly.
I'm glad, because that's why I asked that question, because when you are the focal point of people, they're going to call their doctor for health issues, and when your spirit has been challenged, they're going to call you.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yep.
And then so the question always been, where does the spiritual leader go for support?
Yeah. Well, I one of the, I think it's pandemic or not, like I think as you just described, our role can take its toll, and I've always worked really hard to take care of myself. Sometimes I've succeeded better than others, but yeah, I have a spiritual director who I meet with monthly, and I have a therapist who I meet with, depending on the season, monthly or maybe every other week, and good friends and stuff too. So I just take care of myself as much as I can.
I'm glad, and I'm sure that your congregation is very glad too.
I think so. Yeah.
When you first met for the first time in the church itself, inside, when was that, and how was that received?
What was your question? When we met in the church the first time?
Yeah, after the pandemic, because I'm sure you had the doors open sometime after sometime in 20, right?
Yeah, so we met. We had outdoor services both summers. So that was our sort of first in-person experience.
Right.
And then, it was Pentecost Sunday. So it was the very last Sunday in May this year. Yeah, and honestly, it was like it was a balancing act to not sort of go overboard. And of course, the choir didn't meet, and I don't even know if we sang that first week. But we had little cupcakes to go and little packages and just celebrating being together again.
How was it attended? By half of the people, all the people, some of the people?
Oh my gosh, attendance.
Give or take, approximate.
We were probably about half of what we were before the pandemic then.
But they had to be thankful to be there, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And we like so many, went virtual as well. And so now we've had, you know, a permanent virtual option too. So a lot of our folks are still connecting that way.
How did it feel when you walked up to the lectern, or however you present yourself? How did it feel that first time in May, when you're back in the house and you're back inside and everyone's there and it's like almost normal? How did it feel?
Well, it didn't feel normal.
I can imagine so.
It did not feel normal. Wearing masks and worried about getting each other sick did not feel normal. However, I think I think I was teary-eyed when I welcomed the congregation and did the greeting and started worship. And it was like a relief and scary all at the same time.
Did anybody ever talk about times in the past that their grandparents may have discussed the previous pandemic? Did anybody ever share any stories like that with you?
I actually had one member who was 102 years old who died during the pandemic last year and was born during the first pandemic of the flu.
Wow.
And so that was probably when we talked about it the most, for sure. Yeah.
My grandmother was alive during the first pandemic, and
Wow.
she died about 20 years ago, but we talked about it.
Wow.
You know, when I was a kid, we talked about it because of Spanish flu. Because we go to the cemetery, and you see whole families of people with their headstones. You know,
it's amazing, right?
And you would think today you see whole families with headstones, you think a car accident,
right?
You know, but in 1910, 1920. It was a Spanish flu. That's when the whole thing started. The conversation started like, how could these people all get wiped out? And she talked about it with me, and it was amazing to me when she discussed it.
Right.
And I thought, well, it's because you guys didn't live very well. You didn't have very clean sanitation conditions. Right. I blamed everything on the generation.
Surprise, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So did he share? I mean, he was born during the pandemic, but did he share with anything with you about how they were? What his parents talked about with him about it?
She was a she. Her name was Kay. No, she didn't talk about her parents very much. It just was that kind of interesting quip, like, oh, it's so interesting that Kay was born, you know, when this was the case, and what was it?
1918, yeah.
Yeah, I think she was born in 18 or 19, and you know, it was more of that sort of surprise. I think her family may have talked about it more among themselves, but not with me.
Okay. Did you have anybody who decided to leave the church because of the pandemic?
Leave the church? Let me think. We have had a couple of folks leave over the last couple of years, but not because of the pandemic.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. I can't, I mean, I couldn't speak for my colleagues, but I know a lot of my colleagues have had it much worse off with their parishioners than I have. My folks have been very patient and very understanding and willing to just sort of cooperate for the good of the community, but that's not the case for many colleagues of mine.
Well, I think it shows again your leadership.
Yeah, and how good they are. Just they're kind people. Thank goodness.
And I agree with you, but also it has a lot to do with the leadership, because you're reinforcing that.
Yeah, we tried. Yep.
So when you have when people come to you for any kind of hope or pick me ups and so on and so forth, what was the number one thing that they discussed with you? I mean, what category? Financial, family, their own personal health?
In relation to the pandemic?
Yeah, during this time.
Honestly, I think the number one thing is loneliness. I think I know a lot of my folks are single because of choice or because of death or divorce. And the pandemic has isolated all of us. People come to be a part of a religious community, not just because they're religious, but because they're seeking community, period. And we've been forced to stay apart. That's been the hardest thing for my folks.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that before.
Yeah, loneliness has been, yeah, a running theme.
So how do you respond? I know it's specific to each person. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
But when a person is that much despair and is feeling that low, you tell them it'll end soon and so on and so forth. But it's got to be hard for them to kind of grasp that when they've been stuck in this thing for at least 2 years.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it may sound trite, but just letting them know that they're not alone in it goes a long ways, you know. Letting someone know they aren't alone, letting someone know they have community, even though they feel separated. You know, we've worked hard to be creative about how to connect with one another, and we had a buddy system for a long time, and some of those folks are still just checking in with some of our single folks often. So it really made a big difference, I think.
It's kind of an ironic statement to say, but you're not alone in your loneliness.
Right? Exactly.
Because that was some kind of greeting card, I think, or something like that.
I think so.
It could be. What would you think if you wanted to give a congregation or a pastor or a fellow person in your field, if you wanted to give them some kind of encouragement or hope about this pandemic, or how, if someone wanted to, let me word it this way. If you wanted to be able to share with someone through art or through your experiences with this, what would you want to tell them? How do you handle it? How do you deal with it? And so on. I mean, as far as the pandemic is concerned. What kind of message would you want to send out to people who see your art and see your artwork?
That's a question for my husband. He's an artist.
Is he really?
Yeah. Gosh. I'm not really sure how to answer. I think I don't really know. I mean, I think part of my running, I'm thinking about sort of my themes that I've been preaching upon, and I think I often come down to, again, this desire for relationship, this desire for community, that we are all connected and interconnected, and that, you know, love plays the primary role, that we care for one another because we love one another, and that we are loved. And I think, I hope that would come through if I was an artist in my art as well.
You know, what you just said is really telling, because before the pandemic, you took for granted the connection in a way. We didn't take for granted,
Sure.
but you know what? I mean, we're going to come to church, we'll be fine.
Yeah.
We'll show up for coffee or whatever.
Right.
And then you realize that the connection is critical to everything, but to mostly, yeah,
right.
Because you're trying to connect them to their higher power, to Christ, to whoever. And that's a big deal. You know, people come to church when they try to connect with the Lord and try to connect with the higher powers. And then you realize it's really important for them to connect with each other at this point.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's interesting to think about it that way.
Yeah, and you know, it's the mask wearing thing. I'm sure you've heard it too. You know, it's not really to protect yourself, but you're protecting others, and it's that act of caring for your neighbor. And that was a big thing early on. You know, it's like we hate wearing these things, but we do it because we love our neighbor, and that, you know, is the running theme. What do we do to care for one another?
That's a very good point, because we do it because we love you.
Right.
I'm wearing this mask because I love you that much.
Exactly.
Versus hating it this much not to wear it.
Right. Yeah.
So I love you more than I hate this mask.
Exactly.
So that, yeah, I could see that. Because, you know, it's kind of fun because you don't think about something that you do physically that you can't stand doing. Yeah. Because you love someone. And
it makes it a little bit more bearable.
You have to think of it that way. You have to really kind of force yourself to think it that way, because the mask is just an admission of the problems and this and that, and it represents a lot. That's not very positive.
Exactly.
And so to try to overcome all those negatives with the mask and say, I'm wearing it because I love you.
Yep.
Means, because that's the only positive thing you can think about wearing a mask.
It's pretty powerful, I think. Yeah.
It has to be to overcome all the negatives associated with it. It has to be. Wow, I didn't think about that. Wow. Anything else you want to add, Pastor Angela?
I don't think so. You've asked some good questions, provocative questions.
Well, you're my first in this field that I've interviewed.
Excellent.
And I found it compelling because, again, you're a role model when it comes to trying to lead people through this darkness. And I thought, you don't think about, well, people may not think about first responders as being part of your community, but they are.
I think so.
No, you are.
Yes.
Big time. So. Because they look upon you for spiritual leadership, even more so now than before.
Right.
So that's why I think it's this. And what I'm trying to showcase is, this project has everybody, many different people, many different occupations, and so on and so forth. And so when we have the artwork together from different artists, you'll be able to see what you'll have is you'll have your artwork. I'm looking at a location now for the grand opening of it. But you'll have the artwork in the middle. You'll have the artist name on one side, your name on the other side, what you do, and then a quote from this interview. So when a person sees it, they know what they're looking at.
That's great.
And not just, okay, what does that supposed to mean?
Right.
Because I'm not an artist. I know you said your husband is, but I'm not an artist, and I have a tough time like thinking, where the crap did that come from?
Sure.
But if someone explained it to me, it's much better. So I'll keep you posted as the progress of everything.
Sure, thank you.
Sometime in May or June.
Okay.
And when we have the art unveiled, I'd like you to be there. And you get to meet your artist, and then you get to keep the artwork.
Oh, well, that's exciting.
I know.
I look forward to it. Lovely.
We did this before in Tiffin, a little town of Tiffin, and it was just so emotional. It was so emotional.
Wow, that's really neat.
So, okay. Pastor Angela, thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for connecting.
I'll be in touch with you, okay?
All right. Take good care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.